Hello, all, and welcome to the reading of Book 8 of the Iliad, where we're going to have Hector triumphant. We had him fighting with Ajax in the last one, which was Book 7. And now we're going to have Hector triumphant, but first, Zeus is going to call a council of the gods to see what level of interference they should actually have in this Trojan War. And then, ultimately, we're going to have Hera and Athena be told to pull back a little bit and let Hector do his duty in defense of Troy, because ultimately Zeus knows how the plan plays out, and Hector needs to be able to push to the ships before we can get Achilles involved again in the subsequent books. And without further ado, then, here is Chapman's argument where he foretells that. When Jove to all the gods had given command that none to either host should helpful stand, to Ida he descends, and sees from thence Juno and Pallas haste the Greeks' defence, whose purpose his command by Iris given doth intervene. Then came the silent even, when Hector charged fires should consume the night, lest Greeks in darkness took suspected flight. In Theta, gods a council have, Troy's conquest, glorious Hector's, brave. The cheerful lady of the light, decked in her saffron robe, dispersed her beams through every part of this enflowed globe, when thundering Jove, a court of gods assembled by his will, in top of all the topful heights that crown the Olympian hill, he spake, and all gods gave ear. Here have I stand inclined, that god nor goddess may attempt to infringe my sovereign mind, but all give suffrage that with speed I may these discords end. What god soever I shall find, endeavour to defend, or Troy or Greece with wounds to heaven he shamed shall reascend, or taking with him his offence, I'll cast him down as deep as Tartarus, the brood of night where Barathrum doth steep. Torment in his profoundest sinks, where is the floor of brass and gates of iron, the place for depth as far doth hell surpass, as heaven for height exceeds the earth. Then shall he know from thence how much my power past all the gods hath sovereign eminence. Endanger it the whiles and see, let down our golden chain, and at it let all deities their utmost strengths constrain. To draw me to the earth from heaven you never shall prevail, though with your most contention ye dare my state assail. But when my will shall be disposed to draw you all to me, even with the earth itself and seas shall enforced be. And will I to Olympus top our virtuous engine bind, and by it everything shall hang by my command inclined. So much I am supreme to gods, to men supreme as much. The gods sat silent and admired his dreadful speech was such. At last his blue-eyed daughter spake, O great Saturnides, O Father, O heaven's highest king, we know well the excess of thy great power compared with all, yet the bold Greeks' estate we needs must mourn, since they must fall beneath so hard a fate. For if they grave command enjoin, we will abstain from fight, but to afford them such advice as might relieve their plight, we will, with thy consent, be bold, that all may not sustain the fearful burthen of thy wrath, and with their shames be slain. He smiled and said, Be confident thou art beloved of me. I speak not this with serious thoughts, but will be kind to thee. This said, his brass-hoofed winged horse he did to chariot bind, whose crests were fringed with manes of gold, and golden garments shined on his rich shoulders. In his hand he took a golden scourge, divinely fashioned, and with blows their willing speed did urge, midway betwixt the earth and heaven, to Ida. Then he came, abounding in delicious springs and nurse of beasts untame, where on the mountain Gargarus men did a fane erect. To his high name an altar sweet, and there his horse he checked, dissolved them from his chariot, and in a cloud of jest he covered them, and on the top took his triumphant seat. Beholding Priam's famous town and all a fleet of Greece, the Greeks took breakfast speedily and armed at every piece. So Trojans, who, though fewer far, yet all to fight took arms, dire need enforced them to avert their wives' and children's harms. All gates flew open, all the host did issue foot and horse, in mighty tumult straight one place adjoined each adverse force. Then shields with shields met, darts with darts, strength against strength opposed. The boss peaked targets were thrust on and thundered as they closed in mighty tumult. Groan for groan, breath for breath did breathe. Of men then slain and to be slain, earth flowed with fruits of death. While the fair morning's beauty held and day increased in height, the javelins mutually made death transport and equal fright. But when the hot meridian point bright Phoebus did ascend, then Jove his golden balances did equally extend, and of long rest conferring death, put in two bitter fates, for Troy and Greece he held amidst. The day of final dates fell on the Greeks hard lot sunk to the flowery ground, the Trojans leapt as high as heaven, then did the clasps a resound. Of his fierce thunder lightning leapt amongst the Grecian troop, the sight amazed them, pallid fear made boldest stomachs stoop. Then Idomen durst not abide, Atrides went his way, and both the Ajaxes. Nestor yet against his will did stay. That grave protector of the Greeks, for Paris with a dart enraged one of his chariot's horse, he smote the upper part of all his skull, even what the hair that made the foretop sprung. The hurt was deadly, and the pain so sore the courser stung, pierced to the brain. He stamped and plunged, one on another's bears, entangled round about the beam. Then Nestor cut the gears with his new-drawn authentic sword. Meanwhile the fiery horse of Hector brake into the press with their bold ruler's force. Then good old Nestor had been slain, had Diomed not espied, who to Ulysses as he fled importunely cried, "Thou that in counsels dost abound, O Laertiades, why fliest thou? Why, us coward-like, shunn'st thou the honoured praise? Take heed thy back, take not a dart. Stay, let us both intend to drive this cruel enemy from our dear aged fiend." He spake, but wary Ithacus would not find patient ear, but fled forthright even to the fleet. Yet though he single war, brave Diomed mixed amongst the flight, and stood before the steeds of old Iliades, whose estate thus kingly he reads, "O father, with these youths in fight thou art unequal placed, thy willing sinews are unknit, grave age pursues thee fast. And thy unruly horse are slow, my chariot therefore use, and try how ready Trojan horse can fly him that pursues. Pursue the flyer, and every way perform the varied fight. I force them from Anchises' son, well skilled in course of flight. Then let my squire lead hence thy horse, mine thou shalt guard, whilst I by thee advance to say the fight that Hector's self may try, if my lance doth with the defects that failed best minds in age, finds the palsy in my hands that doth thy life engage." This noble Nestor did accept in Diomed's two friends, Eurymedon, that valour loves, and Sthenelus ascends. Old Nestor's coach, of Diomed's horse Nestor the charge sustains, and Tydeus' son took place of flight. Nelliades held the reins, and scourged the horse who swiftly ran direct in Hector's face, whom fierce Tydides bravely charged, but he turned from the chase. His javelin Aeneas smit mighty Thebeus' son, and was great Hector's charioteer. It through his breast did run, near to the gap. He fell to earth, back flew his frighted horse. His strength and soul were both dissolved. Hector had deep remorse of his mishap, yet left he him, and for another sought, nor long his steeds did want a guide. For straight good fortune brought bold Archeptolemus, whose life did from Iphithus spring. He made him take the reins and mount, then souls were set on wing. Then high exploits were undergone, then Trojans in their walls had been enfolded like meek lambs, had Jove winked at their falls, who hurled his horrid thunder forth, and made pale lightnings fly into the earth before the horse that Nestor did apply. Dreadful flash burnt through the air, that savoured sulphur-like, which down before the chariot the dazzled horse did strike. The fair reins fell from Nestor's hands, who did in fear entreat renowned Tydeus into flight to turn his fury's heat. "For knowest thou not," said he, "our aid is not supplied from Jove? This day he will give fame to Troy, which when it fits his love we shall enjoy. Let no man tempt his unresisted will, though he exceed in gifts of strength, for he exceeds him still." "Father," replied the king, "'tis true, but both my heart and soul are most extremely grieved to think how Hector will control my valour with his vaunts in Troy, that I was terror-sick with his approach. which then he boasts. Let earth devour me quick. Ah, warlike Tydeus' son, said he, what needless words are these? Though Hector should report thee faint and amorous of thy ease, the Trojans nor the Trojan wives would never give him trust, whose youthful husbands thy free hand hath smothered so in dust. This said, he turned his one-hoofed horse to flight, and troop did take, when Hector and his men with shouts did greedy pursuit make, and poured on darts, made their sigh. Then Hector did exclaim, O Tydeus' son, the kings of Greece, do most renown thy name with highest place feasts and full cups. Who now will do thee shame? Thou shalt be like a woman used, and they will say, Depart, immartial minion, since to stand Hector thou hadst no heart. Nor canst thou scale our turrets' tops, nor lead the wives to fleet of valiant men, that wife-like fearst my adverse charge to meet. This 2 ways moved him still to fly or turn his horse and fight. Thrice thrust he forward to assault, and every time the fright of Jove's fell thunder brave and drove him back, which he proposed for sign, to show the change of victory, Trojans should the victors shine. Then Hector comforted his men. All my adventurous friends, be men and of your famous strength. Think of the honoured ends I know benevolent Jove did by his beck profess, conquest and high renown to me, and to the Greeks distress. O fools to raise such silly forts, not worth the least account, nor able to resist our force, with ease our horse may mount, quite over all their hollow dike. But when their fleet I reach, let memory to all the world a famous bonfire teach, for I will all their ships inflame, with those in festive smoke. Fear shrunk and hidden near their keels, the conquered Greeks shall choke. Then cherished he his famous horse, O Xanthus, now, said he. And thou, Podargus, Aethon too, and Lampus dear to me, make me some worthy recompense, for so much choice of meat, given you by fair Andromache, breed of the purest wheat. And with it for your drink mixed wine, to make ye wished cheer, still serving you before myself, her husband young and dear, pursue and use your swiftest speed, that we may take for prize the shield of old Neladius, which fame lifts to the skies, even to the handles, telling it to be of massy gold. From the shoulders let us take of Diomed the bold, the royal cuirass Vulcan wrought with art so exquisite. These if we make our sacred spoil, I doubt not but this night, even to their navy to enforce the Greeks' unturned flight. This Juno took in high disdain, and made Olympus shake. She but stirred within her throne, and thus to Neptune spake. O Neptune, what a spite is this! How God so huge in power afflicts it not thy honoured heart, to see rude spoil devour these Greeks that have in Hellas and Aegae offered thee so many and such wealthy gifts? Let them victors be. If we that are the aids of Greece would beat home these of Troy, and hindered broad-eyed Jove's proud will, it would abate his joy. He, angry, told her she was rash, and he would not be one of all the rest should strive with Jove, whose powers was matched by none. Whilst they conferred thus, all the space the trench contained before, from that part of the fort that flanked the navy's anchoring shore, was filled with horse and targeteers, who there for refuge came, by Mars swift Hector's power engaged. Jove gave his strength to fame, and he would spoil full fire had burned the fleet, if Juno's grace had not inspired the king himself to run from place to place, to stir up every soldier's power to some illustrious deed. First visiting their leaders' tents, his ample purple weed he wore, to show all who was and did his station take at wise Ulysses' sable barks, that did the battle make of all the fleet, from whence his speech might with more ease be driven to Ajax and Achilles' ships, to whose chief charge were given the vanguard and the rear guard, both their force of hand, and trusty bosoms there arrived, as urged he to withstand the insulting Trojans. Oh, what shame, we empty-hearted lords, is this to your admired forms! Where are your glorious words in Lemnos, vaunting you the best of all the Grecian host? We are the strongest men, he said. We will command the most. Eating most flesh of high-horned beeves, drinking cups full crowned, every man 100, foes 200 we'll confound. Now all our strength dared to our worst one Hector, cannot tame. Presently with horrid fire will all our fleet inflame. O Father Jove, hath ever yet thy most unsuffered hand afflicted with such spoil of souls the king of any land, and taken so much fame from him when I did never fail? Since under most unhappy stars this fleet was under sail. Like glorious altars, I protest, but above all the gods, have burnt fat thighs of beeves to thee, and prayed to raise the boats of rape defending Ilions, yet grant Almighty Jove one favour, that we may at last with life from hence remove, not under such inglorious hands the hands of death employ, and where Troy should be stooped by Greeks, let Greeks fall under Troy. This even weeping king did Jove remorseful audience give, and shook great heaven to him for sign his men, and he should live. Then quickly cast he off his hawk to eagle, prince of air, that perfects his unspotted vows, who seized in her repair a sucking hind calf, which she trussed in her enforces seers, and by Jove's altar let it fall amongst the mazed peers, where the religious Achive kings sacrifice did please the author of all oracles, divine Saturnidays. Now when they knew of the bird of Jove, they turned courageous head, when none, though many kings put on, could make his vaunt be led. Did he des to a renewed assault, or issued first the dike, or first did fight, but far the first, stone dead, his lance did strike, armed Agelaus, by descent surnamed Phragmonides. He turned his ready horse to fight, and Diomed's lance did seize, his back betwixt his shoulder blades. Looked at his breast he fell, and his arms rang his fall. Atrides next addressed themselves to fight the Iases next, with vehement strength endued. Idomeneus and his friend Stadmerion next pursued, and after these Eurypylus, Evamon's honoured race. The ninth with backward wreathed bow had little Teucer pace. He still fought under Ajax's shield, who sometimes held it by, and then he looked his object out and let his arrow fly, and whomsoever in the press he wounded, him he slew. Then under Ajax's sevenfold shield he presently withdrew. He fared like an unhappy child that doth to mother run for succour, when he knows full well he some shrewd turn hath done. What Trojans then were to their deaths by Teucer's shafts impressed? Well, hapless Orsilochus was first, Omenus, Ophelest, Data, and hardy Chromius, and Lycophon divine, and Amapone, that did spring from Palemon's line, and Menelaus. All on heaps he tumbled to the ground. The king rejoiced to see his shafts the Phrygian ranks confound, who straight came near and spake to him, O Teucer, lovely man, strike still so sure, and be a grace to every Grecian. And to thy father Telamon, who took thee kindly home, although not by his wife his son, and gave thee foster room, even from thy childhood, then to him, though far from hence removed, make good fame reach. To thyself I vow what shall be proved, if he that dreadful Aegis bears, and Pallas grant to me the expanience of well-builded Troy, I first will honour thee, next to myself with some rich gift, and put it in thy hand, a 3-foot vessel, that for grace and sacred fanes doth stand, or 2 horse and a chariot, or else a lovely dame, that may ascend on bed with thee, and amplify thy name. Teucer right nobly answered him, Why, most illustrate king, I being thus forward of myself, doth thou adjoin a sting, without which all the power I have I cease not to employ far. For from the place where we repulsed the Trojans towards Troy, I all the purple field have strode with one or other slain. 8 shafts I shot, with long steel heads, of which not one in vain. All war in youthful bodies fixed, well skilled in war's constraint. Yet this wild dog, with all my aim, I have no power to taint. This said, another arrow forth from his stiff string he sent, at Hector whom he longed to wound, but still amiss it went. His shaft smit fair Gorgythion of Priam's princely race, who in Epina was brought forth a famous town in Thrace, by Castianira, that for form was like celestial breed, and as a crimson poppy flower surcharged with his steed. and vernal humours falling thick declines his heavy brow, so of one side his helmet's weight his fainting head did bow. Yet Teucer would another shaft at Hector's life dispose, so fain he such a mark would hit, but still beside it goes. Apollo did avert the shaft, but Hector's charioteer, to make the fight, to earth he fell, his swift horse back did fly, and there were both his strength and soul exiled eternal eye. Huge grief for Hector's slaughtered friend, pinched in his mighty mind, yet was he forced to leave him there, and his void place resigned to his sad brother, that was by Cebriones, whose ear, receiving Hector's charge, he straight with weighty reins did bear, and Hector from his shining coach with horrid voice slept on, the Rica's friend on Teucer's hand, and up he took a stone, with which he at the archer ran, who from his quiver drew a sharp-hilled shaft, and knocked it sure, but in great Hector flew with such fell speed, that in his draught he his right shoulder struck, where twixt his neck and breast the joint his native closure took. The wound was wondrous full of death, his string in sunder flees, his numbed hand fell strengthless down, and he upon his knees. Ajax neglected not to aid his brother thus depressed, but came and sapped him with his shield. Two more friends, and addressed to be his aid, took him to fleet Mecasteus, Echius' son, and gay Alaster, Teucer sighed for all his service done. Then did Olympius with fresh strength the Trojan powers revive, who to their trenches once again the troubled Greeks did drive. Hector brought terror with his strength, and ever fought before, as when some highly stomached hound that haunts and hunts the silver boar, or kingly lion loves the haunch that pinceth off behind, bold of his feet, and still observes the game to turn inclined, not utterly dissolved in flight, so Hector did pursue, and whosoever was the last he ever did subdue. They fled, but when they had their dike and palisadoes passed, a numbers of them put to sword at ships they stayed at last. Then mutual exhortations flew, then all with hands and eyes advanced to all the gods their plagues wrung from the open cries. Hector with his full rich-manned horse assaulting always rode. The eyes of Gorgon burnt in him, and war's vermilion god, the goddess that all goddesses for snowy arms outshined, thus spake to Pallas, to the Greeks with gracious ruth inclined. "Oh, Pallas, what a grief is this! Is all our succour past? To these our perishing Grecian friends, at least withheld at last, even now, when one man's violence make them all perish, all. Satisfaction of a fate so full and funeral, Hector Priamides now raves no more to be endured, that hath already on the Greeks so many harms inured." The azure goddess answered her, "This man had surely found his fortitude and life dissolved even on his father's ground by Grecian valour, and if my sire, infested with ill moods, did not so dote on these of Troy, too jealous of their bloods, and ever an unjust repulse stands to my willing powers, like little remembering what I did in all the desperate hours of this affected Hercules. I ever rescued him in labours of Eurystheus, untouched in life or limb, when he, heaven knows, with drowned eyes looked up for help to heaven, whichever at command of Jove was by my suppliance given. But at my wisdom had it reached so far, know of this event, and to this solid-ported depths of hell his son was sent, to hail out tateful Pluto's dog from dark Erebus. He had not scaped the streams of Styx so deep and dangerous, yet Jove hates me, shows his love in doing Thetis' will. Kissed his knees, stroked his chin, and prayed and importuned till that he would honour with his aid her city-raising son, displeased Achilles, and for whom our friends are thus undone. But time shall come again, when he to do his friends some aid will call me his Glaucopides, his sweet and blue-eyed maid. Then harness thou thy horse for me. At his bright palace gates I soon may enter, arming me to order these debates, and I will try if Priam's son will still maintain his cheer, when in the crimson parts of war I dreadfully appear, for some proud Trojans shall be sure to nourish dogs and fowls, and pave the shore with fat and flesh, deprived of lives and souls. Juno prepared her horse, whose mane's ribbons of gold enlaced. Pallas her party-coloured robe on her bright shoulders cast, divinely wrought with her own hands, an entreaty of her sire. Then put she on her ample breast her under-arming tire. And on it her celestial arms, chariot straight she takes, with her huge heavy violent lance, with which she slaughters makes, of armies fatal to her wrath, Saturnia whipped horse, and heaven gates, guarded by the hours, opt by their proper force. Through which they flew, whom when Jove saw, set near Idalian springs, highly displeased he Iris called, that he hath golden wings, and said, Fly, Iris, turn them back, let them not come at me, our meeting severally disposed will nothing gracious be, beneath their overthrown chariot I'll shiver their proud steeds, hurl down themselves, their wagon break, and for their stubborn deeds, in 10 whole years they shall not heal the wounds I will impress with horrid thunder, that my maid may know when to address arms against her father, for my wife she doth not so offend. 'Tis but her use to interrupt whatever I intend. Iris with this left Ida's hills, and up to Olympus flew, met near heaven gates the goddesses, and thus their haste withdrew. What course intend you? Why are you rapt with your fancy's storm? Jove likes not ye should aid the Greeks, but threats and will perform to crush in pieces your swift horse beneath their glorious yokes. Hurl down yourselves, your chariot break, and those empoisoned strokes, his wounding thunder, shall imprint in your celestial parts, and tellful springs ye shall not cure, that she that tames proud hearts, thyself Minerva, may be taught to know for what and when thou dost against thy father fight. For sometimes children may with discretion plant themselves against their father's will, but not where humours only rule in works beyond their skills. For Juno, she offends him not, for vexeth him so much, for 'tis her use to cross his will, her impudence is such. The habit of offence in this she only doth contract, and so grieves her incessed less, though ne'er the less her fact. But thou most griev'st him, dogged dame, whom he rebukes in time, lest silence should pervert thy will, and pride too highly climb. In thy bold bosom, desperate girl, if seriously thou dare, lift thy unwieldy lance against Jove, as thy pretences are. She left them. Saturnia said, Ah me, thou seed of Jove, by my advice we will no more unfit convention move, with Jupiter for mortal men, of whom let this man die, that man live, whoever he pursues with destiny, and let him, plotting all events, dispose of either host, as he thinks fittest for them both, and may become us most. Thus turned she back. To the hours her rich-manned horse resigned, who them to mortal mangers bound. A chariot they inclined beneath the crystal walls of heaven, and they in golden thrones consorted other deities, replete with passions. Jove in his bright-wheeled chariot, his fiery horse now beats up to Olympus, and aspire the gods' eternal seats. Great Neptune loosed his horse's car upon the altered place, and heavenly linen coverings did round about it cast. The far seer used his throne of gold. The vast Olympus shook beneath his feet. His wife and maid apart places took, nor any word afforded him. He knew their thoughts, and said, Why do thou thus torment yourselves? You need not sit dismayed. With the long labours you have used in your victorious fight, destroying Trojans against whose lives you heap in such despite, you should have held your glorious course. For be assured, as far as all my powers by all means urged could have sustained the war, not all the host of deities should have retired my hand from vowed inflictions on the Greeks, much less you too withstand. But you, before you saw the fight, much less the slaughter there, had all your goodly lineaments possessed with shaking fear, and never had your chariot borne their charge to heaven again, but thunder should have smit you both, had you one Trojan slain. Both goddesses let fall their chins upon their ivory breasts. Set next to Jove, contriving still afflicted Troy's unrests, Pallas for anger could not speak, Saturnia contrary, could not for anger hold her peace, but made this bold reply, Not to be suffered, Jupiter, what needst thou still enforce? Thy matchless power, we know it well, but it must yield remorse. To them that yield us sacrifice, nor needst thou thus deride our kind obedience, nor our griefs, but bear our powers applied to just protection of the Greeks, that anger tomb not all, in Troy's foul gulf of perjury, and let them stand should fall. Grieve not, said Jove, at all done yet, for if thy pair eyes please, this next red morning they shall see the great Saturnides bring more destruction to the Greeks, and Hector shall not cease till he have roused from the fleet-swift Aeacides. In that day, when before their ships for his Patroclus slain, the Greeks in great distress shall fight, for so the fates ordain. I weigh not thy displeased spleen, but to the extremest bounds of earth and seats it carry thee, where endless night confounds Japhet and my dejected sire, who sit so far beneath they never see the flying sun, nor hear the winds that breathe near to the profoundest Tartarus, nor thither if thou went, would I take pity of thy mood, since none more impudent. To this she nothing did reply, and now Sol's glorious light fell to the sea, and to the land drew up the drowsy night. The Trojans grieved at Phoebus' fall, which all the Greeks desired, and sable night so often wished to earth's firm throne aspired. Hector, intending to consult, near to the gulfy flood, far from the fleet, led to a place pure and exempt from blood, the Trojans' forces. From their horse all lighted and did hear the oration Jove loved Hector made, who held a goodly spear, even full cubits long. The head was brass and did reflect a wanton light before him still. It round about was decked, strong hoops of new burnished gold. On this he leaned and said, Hear me, my worthy friends of Troy, and you your honoured aid. Little since I had conceit, we should have made retreat, by light of the inflamed fleet with all the Greeks in cheat. But darkness hath prevented us, and sought with special grace these Achives and their shore-hold fleet. Let us then render place to sacred night, our suppers dress, and from our chariot free our fair manned horse, and meet them well. Then let their convoy be from forth the city presently oxen and well-fed sheep, sweet wine, bread, fell much wood, that all night we may keep plenty of fires, even till the light bring forth the lovely morn. And let their brightness glaze the skies, that night may not suborn. The Greeks escape, if they for flight the sea's broad backward take. At least they may not part with ease, but as retreat they make, each man may bear a wound with him to cure when he comes home, made with a shaft or sharpened spear, or others fear to come with charge of lamentable war gainst soldiers bred in Troy. Then let our heralds through the town their officers employ, to warn the youth, yet short of war, time white fathers past, that in our god-built towers they see strong courts of guard be placed about the walls, and let our dames, yet flourishing in years, that having beauties to keep pure, are most inclined to fear, since darkness in distressful times more dreadful is than light, make lofty fires every house, and thus the dangerous night held with strong watch, if the enemy have ambuscaders laid near to our walls. Therefore seem in flight the more dismayed, intending a surprise while we are all without the town. They every way shall be impugned to every man's renown. Perform all this, brave Trojan friends. What now I have to say is all expressed. The cheerful morn shall other things display. It is my glory, putting trust in Jove and other gods, that I shall now expulse these dogs fate sends to our abodes, brings a stench of destiny, black their threatening fleet. This night let us hold strong guards. Tomorrow we will meet with fierce made war before their ships, and I'll make known to all, if strong Tydides from their ships can drive me to their wall, or I can pierce him with my sword, force his bloody spoil. The wished morn shall show his power, if he can shun his foil. I, running on him with my lance, I think when day ascends, he shall lie wounded with the first, and by him many friends. Oh, that I were as sure to live immortal and sustain no frailties with increasing years, but evermore remain adored like Pallas or the sun, so all doubts die in me, that heaven's next light shall be the last the Greeks shall ever see. This speech all the Trojans did applaud, who from their traces lost their sweating horse, which severally with headstalls they reposed, fastened by their chariots when others brought from town fat sheep and oxen instantly bred, wine and hewed down, huge store of wood, the winds transferred into a friendly sky, their suppers savour, to the which they sat delightfully, and spent all night in open field, fires round about them shined, as when about the silver moon, when air is free from wind. And stars shine clear, to whose sweet beams high prospects in the brows of all steep hills and pinnacles thrust up themselves for shows, and even the lowly valleys joy to glitter in their sight, when the unmeasured firmament bursts to disclose her light. And all the signs in heaven are seen, glad the shepherd's heart. So many fires disclosed their beams, made by the Trojan part. Before the face of Ilion and her bright turrets showed, 1,000 courts, guard kept fires, and every guard allowed 50 stout men, by whom their horse ate oats and hard white corn, and all did wishfully expect silver throned morn.